Georgeson come up here?
Kia ora koutou, good afternoon. We've welcome to everyone in the room, all our elected members that are here and staff and those online as we head into this open briefing on local water done well. So this is our ongoing conversation as we head towards a decision around water services and what the future of that might look like for us as a district after our consultation. Which again will just say thank you to all those who submitted into our consultation on local water done well. Having over 500 of you provide your opinions is incredibly valuable for us, so thank you for all those who've taken time to do that. I hope today is helpful as we give you further updates on the conversations and the discussion and the research that's going on and behind the scenes from staff in this particular area. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Sean and he'll introduce this briefing. Welcome to Martin also, who will be speaking at some stage. Thank you.
Thank you. The presentation and probably maybe try and get questions towards the end. We're running a little bit late, so that might be easier in terms of how we manage the process. So we just get through all the slides because there's information in there that might answer some of those as we get to it. So, Martin Cole.
Okay.
Just before we go there, Martin, I just wanted to make aware that there are a couple of apologies for this meeting. So Mayor Janet Holborough is on a leave of absence and Councillor Kathy Spires is an apology for this afternoon as well. Sorry to interrupt, Martin. On you go.
Good. Okay. Good afternoon and thank you. So this update today is just to give you an update on the overview of the consultation results. So previously, about a month ago, we gave you some initial indicators of the direction of travel of the consultation, and now we've got we've had the hearings and the final numbers and results are in, and a bit more about the feedback. So just an overall summary of the consultation itself, the options and priorities. So where people have put their preferences to give you some feedback. Some feedback on the themes that were coming through on the comments as well. An overview of mana whenua reviews, summary of those consultations, the next steps, and then obviously this is, I guess, once the decision is made, that's the start line for the next piece of work, which is the future implementation timeframes as well, just to give you a sense of that. So I'm sure you're all very familiar with this, but I was just reflecting that this journey started about a year ago in May with the signing of a MOU with the Wellington region to look at options to the south of Kapiti. So it's been a year in the making bringing this to the table today, if you like. It's been underneath the Preliminary Arrangements Act. This work has been done, and ultimately the requirement is to bring two options to consult on for the future water services delivery models. Just a reminder that some of the options that have been discounted along the way were working within the Wellington region. That was in November last year. Also consumer trusts, the Kapiti CCO only model and a CCO model, council owned organisation with Kapiti and Horowhenua were discounted and put to one side, and what was brought forward to consultation was two options. Option one being continuation of water services in-house with obviously some changes to respond to the regulation as it rolls out, or option two to consider working in a joint council-owned organisation with Manawatu, Palmerston North and Horowhenua. So those options were, and all the information associated with that was out to consultation with the community from the 10th of March through to the 13th, so just over a month. And just off the press at the moment, Manawatu have resolved to adopt an in-house business unit. So the option of the four now becomes an option of the three. That's very recent news from Manawatu.
Mr. Chair, how are we taking questions at the end, or?
Yeah, we'll take questions at the end. Bernie, can you keep a note of them for us? That'd be great. Thank you.
So during the consultation period, there's quite extensive connection and outreach. So from local pop-ups and all of the main urban areas, a live webinar was held. All council's digital channels were pushing that information out, ratepayers notices and the rates notices, and also an email to ratepayers. And in response to that, there's been 521 submissions, which I understand is quite a significant amount of submissions compared with long-term plan and annual plans. So that's a really good result to get that level of response back. What we can see, just to give you an idea of the breadth of coverage and the breadth of response, this is the age distribution. About 60% of the respondents are aged 60 to 80, about a quarter are from 40 to 60, and 10% over 80 and about 8% under 30. So there's been representation across age groups. In terms of location, again, representative across the district, with Waikanae obviously having the most number of respondents, but it just shows that that's got coverage and connection right across the communities. So the first question was, do you have a preference for option 1 or option 2? And 94% of those that responded to that question said option 1, the in-house business unit, was their preferred option, with 6% being the balance, saying the 4 was their preferred option. And again, just to give you an idea of that coverage, that was broadly represented within a couple of percent across the age brackets, across location, and ratepayers and non-ratepayers came up with about the same number, with perhaps the minor exception in Otaki with a slightly lower preference for option 1 at 87% versus 13% for the 4. But that's really the only variance across those metrics. So very broadly, within a couple of percent following that main option preference. We also asked in the consultation document to express preference or order of priorities. And what we found in terms of the responses there is, in order of priority, the priorities are, from the feedback, that safe and reliable water services was number 1. Public ownership came in second, followed by sound financials, followed then by a resilient organisation, local priorities, and mana whenua. So really strongly on having strong, dependable water services that are publicly owned and financially well managed is what's telling us there. I've also indicated in there for each of the options, option 1, which of those priorities were, I guess, fully met or partially met. So in terms of resilience for option 1, there are some risks around a smaller organisation and the resilience. And for option 4, you can see the 3 there in terms of being financially sound, largely due to the short to medium term higher average costs and local priorities and mana whenua aspirations, and those connections with through a big organisation with staying in touch with local priorities and obviously those relationships with mana whenua. So those were the 2 big questions that were asked in the consultation, and we also provided space for people to free field their comments and put their views down. And the way that that's been analysed, so that's been done by an independent consultation expert, consultancy company that's analysed all those responses. They've read those 521 responses multiple times. They've gone through and picked up individual comments and brought them into themes and sub-themes below that. So we get a sense of whether they're for option 1, against option 1, for option 2, against option 2, and what some of those those themes are that came through. So they're just by collecting those comments together in terms of the same sentiment. And to give you, and the full report will be bringing that to you in the decision paper for the 27th, but to give you a flavour of what that looks like, the feedback in option 1 is the option 1 strengths was 182 responses in support of the various aspects there, from general support to not fixing what's not broken, continuity of existing systems, direct local control, lower cost for ratepayers are some of those sentiments coming through. In terms of weaknesses, there were 5 comments around the weaknesses for option 1. Concern about the long-term economics of scale and managing unexpected large investments. So what I really want to do is just give you a sense of the volume comparatives between what people were saying and commenting on for option 1, and for the strengths and weaknesses. And if you go to option 2, you see there that there's 16 comments on the strengths for option 2 in support, and 125 comments about concerns with option 2. Now, in the report, there are examples of those to give you a flavour of what they are. But for example, concern that Kapiti priorities are going to be outweighed by others is the theme that sits there. Yes, yep. Now, of course, through all of this, mana whenua have been present and been engaged in the process and understanding. So they've come back and reaffirmed the importance and significance and cultural and spiritual significance and value of water and why, and their responsibility for managing and protecting the water resources. And they've also expressed support through Te Whakaminenga o Kapiti for maintaining with the existing in-house business model as well for the management of water services. So just wrapping that up, if you like, community consultation indicates clearly a strong support for option 1, an in-house business unit to deliver the water services with many perceived strengths and few weaknesses, and low support for option 2, the full council option, again, many concerns but few strengths for that. It also gives us a sense of the relative importance of the priorities to the community around that safe drinking water, financially sound and direct control, public ownership. They've also looked at some other themes that weren't directly related to this decision. So these are other points of interest that were commented on through that consultation. Things like transparency of governance and management accountability, inclusion and clear cultural partnerships, prudent fiscal management, environmental stewardship, and the customer. So there's some more pointier comments, if you like, but not related to the decision of the choice of option 1 or option 2. And again, just reaffirming that mana whenua have expressed support for the in-house business unit, option 1. That's the wrap up of the consultation as it's closed out. The full report with these details and with the themes and sub-themes and some examples of those, so you can see that will be coming to you with the decision paper for the 27th as well. But this was really just to give you an update on where that had ultimately landed, and also through the hearings, how that had been delivered.
Fantastic. Thanks, Martin. We'll go to some questions. You're first with the red light, Councillor Coe.
Yep. Thanks, Martin. It's really reassuring to see the community thinking along the same lines as we've been thinking in the process on the way through. I guess some people might say, well, we kind of twisted the words in the consultation document or whatever to make it to lead people down a certain path in their thinking. I'm not convinced about that. And, some of the arguments given were that, we should be concerned about economies of scale. I've done a bit of thinking about that and a bit more reading, and in particular there was the Castalia report done by LGNZ in 2020, and I remain unconvinced of economies of scale in local water. I think we would see, if it existed, we'd see evidence of it now, and in fact we're seeing the opposite. And to me, the driving force, as I said at the last meeting, the driving force around the economics is the asset management, being on top of your forward planning, on top of your maintenance, on top of the current status of your water assets. To me, that is the absolute vital thing in terms of performance and efficiencies. And we're clearly doing that really well now. And I don't see any reason to change that. And I think the other thing too is in terms of the long-term situation, there's just too many uncertainties around the long term. I think, while you have to look at the long-term implications, there's just, a huge, variation in terms of what the outcomes might be. And I think we do need to still retain that short to medium-term focus in terms of what we know about with certainty now, as opposed to taking a punt on what things might be in 20 years' time. So I don't see anything that will change my view of which option we should choose. There's certainly, it's very, very reassuring to know that the community sees things the same way that we do. It's not a question, but just But
It sounded
I'm
a
happy
lot
to be
like debate
challenged.
for the
I'm happy
27th
to be
of May.
challenged on that.
I think the question around the efficiencies, certainly there was a lot of conversation about that. We had another general catch up with the wider council group last week, I think it was, and there was some conversation there at that meeting in Castalia with there. And I think there was also a reference to the I guess the negative aspects of cost associated with that larger scale and the inefficiencies. Maybe I think Castalia talked about that a little bit in terms of offsetting, in terms of that difference between the larger the organisation gets, at some point it starts to become a little less efficient. And that was a key one. And the other one was the geographical. And that was the work that Castalia did. Some of those assumptions around efficiencies are certainly better reflected if there's a geographical connection between those networks. So if you look to the south, obviously Wellington Water, when you're sharing the same pipes across the road into your adjoining council, and you've got 4 separate organisations managing basically the same larger network for water, then there's definitely a bigger element of efficiency there. But yeah, geographically we're not linked to any other council. But and the other thing that came through, just as a side, and it was something that came through the consultation, was delaying this process and doing some more work, and then and also looking at the referendum. So it was information provided last week, I think, by DIA at that wider meeting, was there was no option to look for an extension. Previously there had been some suggestion that you could write to the minister and ask for an extension. Feedback at that meeting last week from the DIA was that there was no, that isn't an option anymore. So that also was some of the feedback we got through the consultation. So we are now inside that time frame that we've talked about before.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coe.
Yeah.
Bernie.
Thank you. Yeah.
Mr.
So mine's relating to the cost, the modelled average cost to customer, that slide right at the beginning, under option 1 and option 2. And you've got 1,645 per annum to customers for all 3 water services. So a clarification, that's the 3 water services combined, right? That's the cost to the customer. On top of that, there is the water meters cost as well, right? There'll be a water meter cost.
That 1,600 is modelled, includes water, wastewater and stormwater. So that is the...
But it doesn't excludes people's individual water meter usage.
Includes an average cost of that. So it is included, the water.
So it includes an average cost for water meters. So, okay, so that's the prediction, 2025, 1645, and that's currently what you were saying it's costing the ratepayers, basically, right? On average. Okay, so if this option is endorsed by the council, I think next year, what cost is it to the council? I mean, the council as a body, they may have to incur additional costs as well. Otherwise, it goes back to I cannot see how it should cost any more than what people are paying at the moment, but it will cost, it definitely will cost more. Why? How?
So as part of the new legislation, there's new reporting requirements, there's a new framework for reporting, and there's a greater view from responding to the Commerce Commission that's going to be required as well. So there are those additional costs. There's also the levies to run the Water Services Authority, which is Te Mata Arawai, which is the Quality Regulator and Commerce Commission. So those in themselves are projected to be around 300,000 a year. So there are additional costs from just the base costs of running the current organisation as it stands. So there's going to have to be some additional resourcing and effort put into those areas.
Okay, so this is a general question, maybe the Chief Executive. So from what I see is more staff are going to be needed to carry out all this, reporting, more staff, so extra staff cost. And on top of that, the additional costs, can we still keep to within the 5% on the long-term plan? 7% on the long-term plan.
So I can answer some of that. So through the consultation, there was a fair bit of questioning around those costs. There was a figure of 1.4 million that was in the consultation document, and there was some questions on that, both through the submissions, but I think also on the day that we heard submissions from the public. And I think, one of the things so we had allowed through the consultation work, we put an estimate into what we thought it would cost to provide for the extra staff that you've just talked about and the extra work associated with compliance. But we also, at the same time, included what we knew were extra costs that we were facing in terms of operating the water network. So chemicals, we know, because we haven't actually done the LTP, we were trying to forecast a 10-year forward program to make sure that the numbers that Morrison Lowe included in their consultation included anything that we knew about that hadn't been allowed for in the long-term plan. So all of the councils that were in that Morrison Lowe, the work, sat down and workshopped and included what they knew they hadn't already included in the long-term plan. And if you read the document, I think there's another 10 million of capex that went in to council's numbers. So everyone put in, because obviously as soon as the long-term plan's published, things change, and that comes back to that certainty around some of those numbers. And so all of the councils went back and looked at them, and our operational costs, we put a 1.4 million into the year one, but it wasn't all related to operating the business unit to deal with the changes in legislation. Only some of it related to that, and that included the staff that you talked about and some allowance for extra paper, the extra reporting and those sorts of things. So that's not currently in the 7%. It hasn't been loaded into the year two. We're talking the year two now, so 26, 27 financial year. We haven't factored that in at the moment, but certainly the intention would be to try and stay within the 7% that's in the long-term plan. That would be what we were looking to do, and that's still work we have to do in terms of refining that cost to bring it back to an actual number. So we've allowed the levy is the thing that's changed straight up. That comes into effect from 1 July this year, I think. Yeah, 25. So there's $300,000 in next year's budget that reflects that change, but we haven't incorporated in those other bigger numbers around staff and reporting, that's for the year after, because that's when it starts to kick in. So in advance of the go live, we'd be looking at locking in some of that stuff. Does that answer the question?
Great, thanks, Bernie. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Look, that's, like Liz said, but pretty much aligned with my thinking as well, having been involved in this now for a while. I'd like to just make some comment on the meeting we were at last week, and just a couple of concerns that came up to me around that meeting, and maybe have some comment around that. But you had the DIA Commerce Commission, I couldn't remember which one that was specifically talking, which was the general feeling I get that anyone that's going in these in a standalone model, it seems like we're a bit of an afterthought. All the energy seems to be geared towards the CCO options and how they're going to make those work. When I challenged them a little bit on that, which was, we'll sort of figure it out, how we're going to transfer the debt over and how we're going to do that sort of stuff. So I'm a little bit concerned. It certainly isn't going to change my mind about looking at the option we've got, but I'm a little bit concerned what the council officers think after coming out of that meeting last week with regards to how the Commerce Commission and that are going to treat us in this space. Yeah, any comment on that at all? I know that's a pretty broad sort of thing, but it was, they seem to have the CCO thing sorted, and they seem to be nudging everyone towards that, and some of the rules that seem to be coming in, that was the first time we heard them last week, was geared towards the CCO, but it wasn't really geared towards the standalone options as such.
Yeah, we haven't. So we would hope they would just treat everybody the same, regardless of whether they're an internal business unit or but there will be different reporting requirements for a CCO because of all the legislation that covers the CCO.
Yeah.
So, I don't know if at that session they went through the audit mechanism that the Commerce Commission would because they haven't actually agreed what that looks like, but they used a model that is used internationally as to how you monitor water CCOs in terms of efficiency and delivery, and that then they talked to that as to that's likely to be where they go with the Commerce Commission. So I don't think there's more complexity to the CCO than there would be to the business unit in terms of that governance structure.
I think it just sort of came to me a little bit as we were talking about it, to be honest, and that was around the Commerce Commission coming in and doing deep dives into our organisation, and they were talking about how they might manage, just checking that we've allocated the right things to the right areas and that sort of stuff. And I brought up the point about debt in relation to turnover sort of scenario, how they would manage that, and it was sort of like, well, we sort of might make some allowances or might zhuzh that a little bit, to make it work. And it was
That's
me,
right.
and when they said that, it was just like, ooh, hang on, I thought we were either doing one thing or the other. Yeah, but
so one of the things that they said, if the Commerce Commission, one of the issues that will need to be very clear is how you ring fence your Three Waters costs.
Yeah.
So everybody needs to be able to demonstrate that their funding matches their expenditure in the Three Waters. And for an internal business unit, that's going to be a little bit more difficult than it would be for a CCO, because the CCO is outside of the organisation. So clearly, money going out, it's a lot easier to ring fence something that's already in a separate business. So they were suggesting if it's an internal business unit, they will want to check that your overhead allocation for HR, your overhead allocation for finance and for fleet management and for buildings truly reflects how much of that is dedicated to the Three Waters. And if this was the suggestion, that if the Commerce Commission come in and look at that and see that you're cross-subsidising your Three Waters by charging, bundling all of your overhead for finance into somewhere else other than Three Waters, or just not truly reflecting the effort that goes in, that they might then step in and say, that's, you can't do that, you need to look at this. Or if you're artificially not recovering enough revenue to match what you're spending by, again, cross-subsidising from somewhere else in council, they'd look to say you need to increase your fees for the Three Waters. But it would only be, well, my understanding is that it only relates to the Three Waters. I don't believe they can come in and say, as a council, you need to start charging rates for these other activities differently or add more in over here. They're only focused on the three waters, and they'll want to know. And that's what we do currently, allocate overheads based on that effort, staff numbers at the moment. So, but some councils might not do that, and where you ring fence your interest or your finance costing, again, if you're not truly reflecting what's been spent in that three waters space, in the three waters fees and charges, then they'll have something to say about that.
Okay.
So that, and they were like, so the Commerce Commission are not going to muck around. They're going to be straight into, if you're not doing what you should be, then they've got the powers to actually make sure that you are doing that, and they've got powers to actually infringe and fine officer. I think it was anyway. It's about $500,000, I think. So they've got some pretty strong powers that they have the ability to use if you're not doing what you should be in terms of that space. But I mean, it would seem reasonably straightforward that you need to do what you're supposed to be doing, and it's not onerous, I don't think, to get it right. So that's the work we need to do, obviously, between now and 1 July 2028 is the date that everything I think needs to be lined up with. Again, there was some feedback through the consultation that people didn't know what was happening when. That's the date that the government have said all of this needs to be going live from that in terms of financial sustainability.
Okay. I guess that sort of dovetails a little bit into my next question. I do bring this up sort of each time we have one of these things, but how we transition, or when we transition over into this model and the cost separation, shall we say, which will fundamentally turn water into a utility charge, which would be separate from rates. How we collect that, I don't know. I'm not too worried about how that works at the moment. But when is that sort of scheduled to happen? Are we going to tie that into the next long-term plan as a process?
That was the intention. In that we already do some of the stuff. And talking to Ian, and ideally we'd do it sooner rather than later, as long as it's not, bringing forward costs that we don't need to expend. But in that we do most of it already, really getting it lined up and well in advance. And I think one of the things around certainty for us anyway, if that decision's made to go for the internal business unit, then we're not subject to a whole lot of changes around CCO establishment. We can get on with delivering what we need to do for compliance. So I expect what you'll see, I mean, having worked for Wellington Water and being part of the establishment there, that took 2 to 3, there was a lot going on whilst you were setting up that business to be at the same time then complying with a whole lot of new standards and new reporting requirements. Is going to be, I think there's going to be a bit of a challenge there to do that all concurrently while you're working through that process. So I think as an IBU, I'd have to say I think it's probably easier for us
I'd agree with that.
to do what we need to do sooner rather than later, and that definitely would be the intention. If
Quite nicely
we go.
dovetail into my last comment. I just, it's interesting, isn't it? You talk about Wellington's Wellington Water as such, and I'm sure we're getting told that the CCO is going to be the answer to everything as such, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I'm sure that was said about Wellington Water when it was first touted as well. This was going to solve all the problems. It was going to be an answer to everything. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this all pans out in the wash in about 5 or 6 years' time, to be honest. That's my comment on that. Thank you.
I've got an add in.
Go for it.
Thank you. I just coming back to your first question, Martin. So we recently met with the minister, and he made it really clear that this local water done well was about empowering local government to make the decisions for their local communities. The caveat on that is, of course, that when the water service delivery plans are submitted, that they stack up and meet the requirements. I'd suggest that we're in a pretty good place here, and that's the message that I keep reaffirming when I meet CEs around the country in relation to the water services. You think about the Manawatu decision this morning. There's about 20 councils that are looking, to consider standing alone because they've got good water services. So that's just from a piece of data that we received a little while ago. So the discussion's there, but yeah, the minister was really clear He wants local government to make those local decisions for their communities.
Thank you, Darren. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, Wellington Water went into a real slide after you left, Sean. It continues. Yeah. I found some of the Castalia report stuff very, very disturbing. And I did mention to the speaker the quote about, and it was a quote, "This is the way you will have to think." So I found that very Big Brother. I found the whole thing Big Brother, actually, and the Commerce Commission really disturbing about the powers that they have in this space and what they can do. It's just struck me that there's no philosophical underpinning. It was just about the word, as I said this morning, the word minimum got mentioned. It's all about minimum standard. So if we prioritise in Kapiti that we think, no, the minimum standard's not sufficient, we want to be above that standard. Of course we should want to be above that standard without doing a kaipara, you have to go too far. But then the Commerce Commission can come in and go, no, you don't need to do that. You can have a minimum standard, higher risk, you have to accept that. Or alternatively, they might go, well, we think you should have put some gold plating on those taps over there. And we've had a look through and we think if you shut down one of your libraries, you could manage that better. Now, they've actually given themselves, again, the power to come in, do a forensic audit of your organisation and determine what your spend should be, how you prioritise your spend. Now, as a council, that's a philosophical decision that we make. We may decide that we don't need to recover 100% of the cost of water. Because say we decided, well, okay, we think that there are substantial communities that are poorer than other communities and we're not going to require 100% from those people, but we're not going to ask those people over there to subsidise it, we'll use another mechanism. Now, under the Commerce Commission rules, they come in and go, no, you can't do that. You can't make that decision for your community. So I take what Darren's saying, they're saying that you can, but on the other hand, they're saying that you can't. We'll come in and ride roughshod. And the other one, which is a note of caution for anybody who's thinking about becoming a director of this new organisation, and I'm sure I'm on the shortlist, that there is no indemnity. You get no indemnity. At the moment, we're indemnified against making bad decisions, not reckless ones, but bad decisions. We haven't made any yet so far. But if we did, we have indemnity. Under this new legislation, there is no indemnity for directors, including councillors. And my understanding is if we go into an in-house model even, that councillors and the mayor, mainly the mayor probably, but will not be indemnified. Now that was Castalia, I forget the guy's name now, but he confirmed that was the case. That to me is a significant concern, that you could become so risk averse that you don't make good decisions just because there's a potential to make a bad one. So in terms of pushback, once we've decided the entity we want, how much pushback do you think we have in going and saying, well, actually, we think this is too much or whatever?
Well, I think the Castalia reference was to the board. If you set up a CCO, you've obviously got an independent board, and then you've got a management input. Definitely those exist, but how they're applied in terms of council laws as opposed to board members on an independent board, we'd have to
You'd want
find
some
out.
clarification, sure.
But that's the CCOs. But
No, we're exposed. It's
So,
pretty clear
yeah.
in that
Yeah.
report.
But you're currently, you'd be surprised what the Tamata Arawai has ability to leverage. I don't know if they're the same amounts of money, but there are penalties sitting within that legislation.
Yeah.
Health and safety and work, that legislation also has penalties. But yeah, it's that the liability and the being able to step outside of that. I'm not sure if that applies to Tamata Arawai, but certainly seems to be that it would apply to this. And with the question about whether we want to charge less or more, or
Yeah. Well-
it's clear that that's now, that legislation's already gone through, I think, in terms of and the fees and charges are set in conjunction with the Commerce Commission and the new entity. But
Yeah.
I guess the
Again,
in-house business model,
Hmm.
you then are linked to our water supply strategy document.
Yeah.
So there's a process there to go through, but I don't know. I mean, in terms of detail, that's
Yeah, I
how
mean,
they might
I think
check.
these are some of the things that we probably need to work through once we get into the next phase. Some of those people who were talking about, you weren't seriously considering the 4 and it was all a fait accompli, they're probably feeling a bit silly now. We should make a headline out of Manawatu pulling the plug first. So it was never the 4, but just the 3. Although they did the same as we did at that first meeting in Horowhenua, they indicated that their preference was to be a 1, and our preference was to be a 1. It was only ever left a 2. And the last bit for me was in terms of Greater Wellington and flood protection work that they do, and some of the stormwater work that they do, and the NZTA require stormwater work as well. And I just wonder, where does that fit? So is there anything in that area that wouldn't be us, but would be another entity? I'm mainly thinking about the Greater Wellington stuff.
Yeah, flood protection is outside of this.
Yeah, but
Completely, so
in that
that's-
flood protection, they do have to feed into stormwater systems, etc., from time to time, don't they? So I'm just wondering if there is there any...
well, if they're not doing the first one well, it ends up getting into the
That's right.
to the second one. So
Yeah. So is there a charging mechanism, or because at the moment we just go, oh, that's okay, shit happens, right? But
well, we have a conversation about who's responsible for
Oh,
what.
that
But
was
we
an actual
no,
question.
there isn't I'm not aware of any change in that regard. The same with NZTA. So road sumps and funding and subsidy for those. Yeah, there was a lot of conversation as part of the previous Three Waters work that Labor were working on, and in that model, the legislation was moving some responsibilities around in terms of private stormwater, open drains and things like that. But all of that went out with that legislation, and nothing's been brought back in other than we've got the ability to keep stormwater in-house if you chose to go to a CCO, or you've got the ability to contract it to the CCO or move some of it across. But I don't think there's anything else other than that, really. Martin, is there?
Those regional council powers and responsibilities remain unchanged, as I understand from the legislation, and it's just purely at the council stormwater level.
Thanks,
just-
Nigel.
On the back of Martin's point and Nigel's too, actually, and what we now know coming out of that meeting the other day, do you think that we should have actually probably had 3 options for consultation, one being the CCA? Or is that a moot point because we didn't? So the CCO is 100% off the table now, isn't it, because we didn't consult on it?
Well, so the advice that was provided was it didn't offer the same benefits financially,
Yeah,
and
I
it
understand
incurred
that.
a whole lot of extra costs that you didn't necessarily need because you weren't facing the same financial difficulties in terms of sustainability that a lot of those other councils are facing. And this is where the CCO offers you the 500%, your ability to borrow more relative to your levels of revenue come into consideration. So I'm not sure if nothing's changed through this process that would suggest there's any other benefit coming through.
It just sounds like it possibly is more complex having a in-house business unit and opens maybe the door for than a CCA. Is that
no.
that's sort of what I took out from what you said, or no? Yeah, well,
The liability is the same, exactly the same for either IBU or CCO. I guess that simplicity of ring fencing is and the scale of how complex a CCO might be relative to how complex it is for us to ring fence. I think they're at an order of magnitude because we already do it. But the work you have to put in to set up a CCO and the cost is way more. It was a lot more than what we'd have to do to be getting through an audit with the Commerce Commission. I guess that's the key thing because we do most of that at the moment.
I think it probably just signifies what a moving feast it is.
Yeah, well,
guess,
and there's,
you know,
and
not-
that's still not
you don't know
locked
what you
in.
don't know until after
Yeah,
you know it.
That's
So,
right.
yeah.
Martin?
This is a progressive piece of legislation. We haven't had the third bill passed into, and that's got a lot of
That's
meat
the
and sandwich.
point.
There's 300 and something pages in the detail there. So we sit now, if you set up you talk about a CAPI-only CCO, you bring in another layer of governance and organisational overhead, a whole lot of systems that you now actually got advantage of plugging into the council systems. So that first step is just due diligence around all those interfaces. And the council understands that really well because through the last reform, they've gone and looked at where all those interfaces are and, you know, cost allocation. So there's some really solid work there to make that really nice and tight and demonstrable to Commerce Commission. And I think the other thing is that the Commerce Commission is a bit of a shift of philosophy as to who looks after the customer. And it's a fundamental shift in that legislation that they're not coming to rat you out, they're coming to look that you are running your organisation efficiently and the money you receive for water goes against water. And I think they'll be working on that basis.
I think just quickly, something that did come up and we need to mention the numbers that were put up for creating that CCO. So there was a conversation at the last session about that they were too expensive. I think the number was about 15 million for the...
Yeah.
And definitely the DIA were providing feedback and providing examples where you don't necessarily have to invest all of that funding at the start of the CCO process. You know, there's a conversation about that. So that money would include normally, which is what the new financial system, new hardware, new computers for that. You're bringing together, 150 people, new billing systems, new payroll, a whole lot of cost to apply to the new entity. But there is also an alternative might be you use the current systems or you expand your current system to allow the CCO to use it. So you don't set that stuff up on day one. You do it over a 5-year or over a length of time. But the counter that was raised at the meeting, I think Darren might have raised, you're still incurring those costs. Whether you spread them over 5 years or 10 years, you still end up paying them and the customers pay them. And to be honest, if you wanted to give your CCO the best opportunity to be successful, then you'd probably want to set that stuff up at the start rather than dragging it out over a longer period of time. But that would definitely reduce your costs, and Morrison Lowe had done some work in advance of that session to reduce costs based on doing that. So just the main stuff you need to do up front, and then you spread the rest over a longer period of time. And I think some of the feedback we had at the Waikanae public meeting was, you could set up a CCO in theory, the paperwork for, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 on paper, and then you could start to integrate those costs. So you could do it that way, but if that's not necessarily the most, I don't believe, efficient way of actually setting something up, and just really moves the money further down the track for someone else or same people to pay in terms of customer.
Look, I don't think anyone has any issue with regards to our decision to be a standalone versus a CCO. My concern at the meeting last week was actually the following page, because Coop's hit the nail right on the head then, is that this has come in after we made our decision what to consult on. Because from a liability perspective here, we're 3 years into this, so we're experienced now. The next lot of councillors that come in are not. Yet they will be potentially liable under specific circumstances for individuals. Now, it's directors for the CCOs and EMs for in-house models. So if we put it in a CCO, then the liability is not on us, if you like. And that sort of stuff. We're just Joe average people to put our hand up to represent our communities. And we try to do that in a constructive way. And there are current protections because it says here what economic regulation means for elected members. Currently accountable to local communities, voters, statutory duties, etc. What changes under the economic regulation? Elected members' discretion is reduced on investment decisions, tariff setting, financial choices. There are more sophisticated governance and management requirements, and Commerce Commission becomes the independent referee of efficient costs, tariff levels and financing structures. Liability under specific circumstances for individuals, directors for CCOs and EMs for in-house. Now, that's come in after a decision point. So my question, I think even to them was, so what's next? What else is going to come in? Because this legislation is still being evolved. And that's, I guess that's the concern that we can potentially have as elected members, is that, so what else? So, and I guess that's what I was referring to, is there seems to be a bit of a nudge here. We want you in a CCO. So, you know, from a liability perspective, let's make that a little bit more appealing to be in a CCO than not. I guess that's what I'm referring to with regards to the direction here, because that's not very fair and reasonable, considering we earn 50, 60 grand a year for doing this job. You know, like I said, it's you know, more sophisticated governance and management required. So we're actually setting ourselves up for a more complex understanding in relation to this role. The question is, we're going to be remunerated for that. I can guarantee you the answer to that is no. It's an interesting one, to say the least.
I'm just going to say thanks for the observations, Martin.
I will note that they are penalties for continual negligence, which you are liable for that in your current seat as you are now if we make negligent decisions, particularly around health and safety. So,
Scenario, there's a big weather event and our stormwater gets overridden, it comes into our wastewater, houses get flooded or anything like that. Are we then liable for prosecution because something beyond our control? But hey, we're the guys that are liable under this situation. Are we then potentially liable? I don't know. This is a scary part, because this opens up those questions without really any answers as to what next. Okay, come on guys, and the way this government's going, personally, I don't think anything's off the table.
I'm just going to say maybe we should focus on the decision, not catastrophise. If something happens now, you're liable for other stuff. So maybe we should just focus on the decision that you need to make ahead for council. Good points though.
Yeah. No, I think we will listen, we will learn, and we will lead. the great Kirby quote. Actually, I'll give a shout out to Darren. I thought you represented really well at that meeting, pretty much from the off, where you called out some of the silly stuff, and so it was quite important, I think, to establish where we were, because there was some mythologising going on, and in terms of being a CCO, the only value that I could see, nobody convinced me of anything different, was the ability to borrow more money. And you would only borrow more money if you needed to. It's not like you could borrow it and go, oh, great, now we'll build that other swimming pool, because it's got to be, any borrowing would presumably have to be specifically related to water anyway, otherwise Commerce Commission would be all over you. So and talking to other councils, I was talking to Manawatu. They clearly were in exactly the same position. They just couldn't see what the value would be. But I do wonder, given that Manawatu have decided to go on their own, and they're likely to be the only one within Kui of us, are we going to sit down and have a chat with them just to see, you know, so they'll have a plan for what they want to do, we'll have a plan, maybe they've got some good ideas or we've got some good ideas. So is there any, assuming we get past this decision, to actually those go-it aloners, to have a chat with them and see where there might be some singles club, yeah, the water singles club. Yeah, but I mean, you don't.
Is that a serious question?
Well, yeah, it is.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, it is a serious question, because it seems pointless if every individual organisation there may be information that you can share with each other that might be of value. That's all. Because I mean, we're obviously going to have the perfect model, but maybe they've got some add-ons we could use.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hamish, so the GM, so we talk across the sector, and once the decision's made as to what direction we're going in, then yeah, absolutely, we'll be talking to. We're already talk to Pororua about what's happening in CCO down there with them. So I met with Mike a month ago, So it is, yes, we would definitely, and especially if we're doing some of the consultancy work that you might have to do, you'd probably look, if you could, line up same person, share the costs, that sort of thing. That's always which is what we've done with Morrison Lowe in terms of the water service delivery plan work that they're doing for Horowhenua as well. So.
Okay. Right, well, let's go on to next steps. Just confirm those and then we can finish up. 3 o'clock.
Next steps from here are obviously bring a paper before council on the 27th with the decision for the water services model for you to decide on. Then there's obviously that communications is very important of that decision, both internally and externally. There's a lot of staff that are interested, obviously, to know what's happening next and what the direction is. Obviously, the public announcement, but also you've got that provision back to the submitters on the consultation for putting that effort in and putting a submission in is coming back to them on what the decision ultimately came up with. And then from there, it's preparation of the water service delivery plan that needs to be certified by the CE and then brought to yourselves, to the council for adoption by the end of August. We're looking at perhaps I think it's the 30th of July as a meeting for adopting that. And then that's got to be lodged with the Department of Internal Affairs on the 3rd of September. And they'll take some time to go through that and come back with any commentary. And then I guess that gets to the start line. After a year of this piece of work, that gets you to the start line of engaging with this new legislation. Later this year, we can expect that Bill 3, the third part, the substantive part of enduring settings, will be coming out, and a lot of the questions around the Commerce Commission and some of those powers and the regulations they might see are starting to come out. You've got the Commerce Commission information disclosure documents as well. We'll start to see those, but they'll, from what I can see in the way they've consulted on those, they'll be progressive. They'll start with what's in the industry, and then they'll progressively work forward on those. So just to give you a bit of an idea of what's happening over the next couple of years, from effectively next year, which is 1 July 25, there's setting up the systems, and for some that means establishing ring fencing. For Kapiti it means doing the due diligence around the ring fencing that's already in place. It's setting up things, it's looking at separate accounting for the water activities themselves, starting to look at the policies and arrangements and where the water's positioned, take the asset management plans off the shelf and have another look at those. 26, 27 is into transitioning into the new arrangements. So in 26, 27, they'll be looking for those ring fence financial accounts to be coming through. So those are already in place, already be coming through in your reporting as it stands. 26, 27 is when you'll be developing the water services strategy, which is effectively your water services long-term planning. Because by 27, 28, that'll come into effect, because by the end of 27, 28, you're going to need to be able to demonstrate financial sustainability. And that's really the back mark in the legislation. So those are the the big steps that all entities, in-house, CCO, all going to have to work through. The CCOs are also going to have to set up the CCO, stand it up, make it operational, transfer across the operations, in addition to bringing in all these other regulatory requirements. So that's just a bit of a macro view, if you like, from 27 onwards. The water services strategies will be in place and in play, and the full suite of water legislation that's being enacted now will be in play.
Thanks, Martin. Any questions? Last ones? Comments? Yeah, Mr.
Yeah, just a comment you made just before around staff, more than anything else. And look, I've actually got no issue around any of this, because I know that we do look after our staff. But just ensuring this is not going to leave any of our staff sort of worse off through that transition period. I'm picking that that's something that we'll be working towards being as a smooth transition as possible.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Staff hopefully shouldn't really see any change, other than, well, we might have to look at things like timesheets and things, although and they do that at the moment anyway. So
Yeah.
I don't think they'll see any
Cool. Okay.
change other than more visibility over what they do, maybe in terms of the public view and what we were required to report
Yeah.
through the new legislation.
Cool. Okay. No, just nice to mention it.
Yeah, just a point for me I would like to see whatever entity we are looking to establish and how we establish it to be as election-proof as possible. I'm pretty certain there'll be a change of government next year, but even if that's just a hypothetical, but if the government did change next year, rather than us having to go through a circus again if there's a new raft of legislation, which there may well be, that we've got an entity that is a self-sustaining entity regardless of new legislation. So I'm assuming that's, I don't know if that is factored in, because in the past, I mean, everybody went down the Three Waters thing, like there was no chance of a change of government, and of course there was every chance of a change, and in fact there was one. And so now, and then we had to unpick all sorts of things. I mean, we even borrowed money for depreciation, I think, didn't we? Something like that. Debt-funded depreciation, on the basis that we were going to get this $110 million back. So for me, just whatever entity we set up, I'd like to see that as election-proofed as possible. Just for that to be a factor, for that to be a consideration. So I'd want to know from other opposition, what are your policies? What might be different? Just be aware of those things, that's all. Yeah. But you never know. Yeah, exactly. Good example. Yeah.
I was going to say, how do you make it election-proof? The first election is coming up this year. That's probably the...
Good luck to anyone that pushes for a CCO or to join other
Anyway.
entities. That's what I'd say.
Anyway, so... all right, thank you everyone for that briefing. Thank you for those who are online and who will visit this later and watch it. Hope you've enjoyed that. Bit of an update and a conversation. We'll be coming towards a decision 27th of March on our... May, sorry, thank you for the correction. 27th of May for the next stage in this process of Local Water Done Well. Thanks everyone.